I woke up on Tuesday morning, grabbed my coffee and walked outside to get the newspaper. That's when I saw it, a bright yellow line painted across the middle of my driveway with a sign that read, HOA Community Access Zone. Someone had literally painted a line across my property overnight and thought I wouldn't notice. Let me tell you something about my driveway. It's not just any driveway. When I bought this house 2 years ago, I specifically looked for a property with a private driveway that wasn't part of any shared access or community nonsense. I'd had enough of apartment complexes and HOA drama from my previous place. Before you watch full story, comment down your country name. I would love to hear from you. Also subscribe channel. My driveway is 45 feet long, connects directly to the main road, and according to my property deed, it's 100% mine. Not community property, not a shared easement, not part of any HOA jurisdiction. The paperwork was crystal clear when I bought the house. But apparently the Sunset Valley HOA had other plans. Here's what made my situation unique, and why the HOA thought they could get away with this. My house sits at a weird angle in the subdivision. When they built this neighborhood back in the 90s, my lot was carved out differently because of some drainage issues. The result? My driveway became the most convenient route to access the community pool, tennis courts, and the fancy clubhouse they built 5 years ago. For 2 years, I didn't mind neighbors occasionally using my driveway as a shortcut. It was easier than going around the long way, and I figured live and let live, right? Wrong. That was my first mistake. The HOA saw my tolerance as weakness and my driveway as an opportunity. The morning I found that yellow line, I also found a letter in my mailbox. Official HOA letterhead, signed by the board president, Carol Martinez. The letter informed me that my driveway had been reclassified as a community access road for the safety and convenience of all residents. Reclassified. Like they owned it. The letter said I had 30 days to remove any obstructions from the community access zone, which apparently included my garbage cans, my car, and a small planter my daughter had made in art class. I read that letter 3 times, each time getting angrier. Then I did what any reasonable person would do. I called the HOA office. Sunset Valley HOA, this is Tracy speaking. Hi Tracy, this is Mike Johnson from Maple Street. I got a letter about my driveway being reclassified as community property. There's been some kind of mistake. Oh, Mr. Johnson. Yes, I have your file right here. The board voted last month to designate your driveway as shared community access. It's all perfectly legal. Legal? It's my property. I have the deed. Well, the community has been using it for years, so it's really more of a formality. You know, making it official. I felt my blood pressure rising. Tracy, I need to speak with Carol Martinez immediately. Mrs. Martinez is very busy, but I can schedule you for next month's board meeting if you'd like to discuss this. Next month. They wanted me to wait a month while they turned my driveway into a public road. No, Tracy. I want to speak with her today. I'm sorry, but that's not possible. Is there anything else I can help you with? I hung up and immediately called my real estate attorney, David Kim. We'd worked together when I bought the house, and he knew my property situation better than anyone. Mike, they can't just reclassify your driveway, David said after I explained the situation. That's not how property law works. Do you have your original deed? Of course. Bring it to my office tomorrow morning. We're going to shut this down fast. But the HOA wasn't waiting for lawyers. The next morning, I woke up to find orange construction cones lining my driveway. Not on the sides, right down the middle, creating 2 lanes. One lane was marked resident access, and the other was marked community access. They'd turned my driveway into a 2-lane highway overnight. I was putting on my shoes to go move the cones when I heard voices outside. Through my window, I saw Carol Martinez standing on my driveway with 2 other board members, measuring something with a long tape measure. I walked outside in my bathrobe and slippers. Excuse me, what are you doing on my property? Carol looked up with that fake smile that screams, I'm about to ruin your day. Good morning, Mike. We're just measuring the new community access zone. We want to make sure we have adequate space for the upcoming improvements. Improvements? Oh yes, we're installing proper lighting, maybe some decorative borders, perhaps a small sign. Really make it look official. I stared at her. Carol, this is my driveway. You can't just take it. We're not taking anything, Mike. We're simply formalizing the arrangement that's existed for years. The community has been using this access route, and now we're making it official for everyone's benefit. My benefit? How does losing my driveway benefit me? Well, you'll have better lighting, maintained pavement, and the satisfaction of contributing to community harmony. That's when I lost it. Get off my property. Right now. Carol's fake smile faltered. Mike, there's no need to be hostile. We're all neighbors here. Neighbors don't steal each other's driveways. I'm giving you 10 seconds to remove these cones and get off my land before I call the police. The police? Carol laughed. Mike, this is a civil matter. The police can't help you. She was wrong about that, but I didn't know it yet. I spent the next hour on the phone with the county sheriff's office. The deputy who answered was surprisingly helpful. Sir, if it's your property and they're trespassing, that's a criminal matter. Do you have documentation proving ownership? Yes, I have the deed. We can send someone out to document the trespass, but you'll need to post no trespassing signs first. Make it clear that the property is private. Within 2 hours, I had 3 large "No trespassing" private property signs posted at the entrance to my driveway. By that afternoon, I had a police report documenting the HOA's unauthorized use of my land. But Carol Martinez wasn't done with me yet. That weekend, I left town to visit my sister in Denver. When I came back Sunday night, my driveway was completely blocked by a moving truck. Not parked nearby, completely blocking the entrance so I couldn't get to my own garage. I knocked on the truck door. The driver, a tired-looking guy in his 50s, rolled down the window. Hey, I need to get into my driveway. Can you move the truck? Sorry, buddy. I was told to park here by the HOA lady. She said it was community access and I could use it for unloading. The HOA lady? Yeah, Carol something. She said residents use the other entrance anyway. I looked around. There was no other entrance. Carol had sent this moving truck to block my driveway, knowing I was out of town, hoping I'd come home to find myself locked out of my own property. The moving truck driver was actually pretty cool about it once I explained the situation and showed him my house keys. He moved the truck immediately and even apologized. Man, that lady made it sound like this was some kind of public road. I had no idea it was your driveway. But the damage was done. Carol had tested her strategy and now I knew she was playing dirty. Monday morning I called David Kim again. They're escalating, David. It's not just about the driveway anymore. They're actively trying to make my life miserable. Mike, I have good news and bad news. The good news is your property rights are rock solid. The bad news is HOAs can make your life hell while you fight them in court. How long would a court case take? 6 months to 2 years depending on how dirty they want to play. 2 years of this nonsense? No way. David, what if we approached this differently? What if instead of just defending my driveway we went on the offense? What do you mean? I mean, what if their whole community access thing backfired on them? That night, I started digging into the HOA's history, their bylaws, and most importantly, their legal vulnerabilities. What I found was fascinating. The Sunset Valley HOA had been cutting corners for years. Their community access routes weren't properly documented with the county. Their easement agreements were outdated. And most interesting of all, their access to the main road depended on crossing through 2 privately owned lots that had never formally granted easement rights. One of those lots was owned by an elderly man named Frank Peterson who lived at the entrance of the neighborhood. The other was owned by the city, but the HOA had never filed the proper paperwork to use it as an access road. In other words, the HOA's main entrance and exit routes were completely illegal. I spent the next week researching property law, easement rights, and municipal access requirements. I learned that if a property owner formally revokes informal access rights, anyone using that property for access can be charged with trespass. I also learned something else interesting. The HOA's expensive clubhouse, pool, and tennis courts were only accessible through these informal access routes. If those routes were legally challenged, the entire community would lose access to the facilities they'd been paying for through their HOA dues. That's when I had my brilliant, slightly evil idea. I called Frank Peterson, the elderly gentleman who owned the lot at the neighborhood entrance. I introduced myself as a neighbor and asked if we could chat about property access issues. Frank was 78 years old, sharp as a tack, and absolutely fed up with the HOA. Mike, they've been driving across my property for 15 years without asking permission. Every time I try to talk to them about it, they blow me off. Frank, what if I told you there was a way to make them pay attention? We met at a coffee shop the next day. I explained my situation, showed him my research, and proposed a partnership. Frank, legally speaking, they can't use your property for access without your permission. If you revoke that permission, they're trespassing every time they drive across your land. But won't that trap the entire neighborhood? Temporarily, yes. But here's the thing, they'll have to negotiate with you directly. You'll have all the leverage. Frank smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Mike, I like the way you think. We spent the next hour planning our strategy. Frank would formally revoke access permissions for his property. I would block my driveway completely, cutting off their shortcut to the community facilities. Together, we'd force the HOA to negotiate from a position of weakness instead of strength. But first, I had to make sure everything was completely legal. David Kim was skeptical when I outlined the plan. Mike, you're talking about cutting off access to an entire neighborhood. Are you sure you want to escalate this far? David, they tried to steal my driveway. They're the ones who escalated. Fair enough. Let me research the legal implications. 2 days later, David called me back with his findings. Mike, it's risky but it's legal. Frank has every right to revoke informal access permissions, and you have every right to block your own driveway. The HOA would have to prove they have legal easement rights, which they don't. What's the worst that could happen? They could sue both of you for interference with community access, but they'd lose because they never had legal access rights to begin with. The real question is whether you're prepared for the chaos this will cause. I thought about Carol Martinez measuring my driveway like she owned it. I thought about coming home to find my property blocked by a moving truck. I thought about 2 years of legal battles while they made my life miserable. I'm prepared. Frank and I coordinated our timing perfectly. On a Thursday morning, Frank posted official, "No trespassing," private property signs at every point where the neighborhood access road crossed his land. He also filed a formal revocation of access permissions with the county. That same morning, I installed a chain and lock across my driveway entrance, completely blocking any vehicle access. I also posted additional no trespassing signs and installed a security camera to document any attempts to cut the chain or move the barriers. Then we waited. The first panicked call came at 10:30 a.m. "Mr. Johnson, this is Tracy from the HOA office. There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding. Residents can't access the community facilities." "That's not my problem, Tracy. But you've blocked the access road. I've secured my private property. If residents need access to community facilities, they should use public roads. But there aren't any other public roads to the facilities. That sounds like a planning problem." I hung up. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly. I stopped answering. By 2 p.m., there were 12 cars parked on the main road outside the neighborhood because residents couldn't get to the community facilities for their afternoon activities. By 4 p.m., Carol Martinez was standing at my front door. I watched Carol through my window before answering the door. She was red-faced, clutching a folder of papers and clearly furious. "Mike, open this door right now." I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "What can I do for you, Carol? You can stop this ridiculous tantrum and unlock your driveway immediately. My driveway is secured on my private property. If you have a problem with that, call your lawyer." "Mike, you're hurting the entire community. Senior citizens can't get to their exercise classes. Kids can't use the pool. You're being selfish." "Carol, I'm doing exactly what you did to me. You decided my private property was community property. I disagreed. Now I'm enforcing my property rights." "That's completely different." "How?" Because the community needs access." "The community needs access to my driveway? Then they should have asked for an easement instead of trying to steal it." Carol opened her folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "Mike, I have a restraining order here that requires you to restore community access immediately." I looked at the papers. They were photocopied forms from the internet, not legal documents. "Carol, this isn't a restraining order. This is something you printed from Google. It's a cease and desist order." "From who?" "You can't issue legal orders to your neighbors." Carol's face was getting redder. "Mike, if you don't open that driveway, I'll call the police." "Go ahead. I'll be happy to show them the trespassing reports I've already filed." She stormed off, shouting something about lawyers and lawsuits. An hour later, a police cruiser pulled up to my house. Officer Rodriguez was professional and polite. He explained that the HOA had filed a complaint about me blocking community access. "Mr. Johnson, can you show me your property documentation?" I handed him my deed, the property survey, and the police reports I'd filed about the HOA trespassing. Officer Rodriguez studied the documents for several minutes. "Sir, this is clearly your private property. You have every right to control access. The HOA claims it's a community access road. Do they have easement documentation?" "No, they just started using it informally and decided to make it official." Officer Rodriguez shook his head. "That's not how property law works. Sir, you're not violating any laws. The HOA, however, may be violating yours." "What do you mean?" "If they're using your property without permission, that's trespass. If they're claiming ownership of property they don't own, that could be fraud." Officer Rodriguez left after taking additional photos and documenting the HOA's unauthorized signs on my property. But the real fun was just beginning. By Friday morning, the situation had reached a breaking point. The community pool was hosting a children's birthday party that couldn't be accessed. The tennis courts had scheduled tournaments that had to be canceled. The community center had 3 different events planned that couldn't happen. More importantly, several residents were starting to ask uncomfortable questions about why the HOA had never properly secured access rights to the community facilities. I started getting calls from neighbors I'd never met. "Mike, this is Janet from Oak Street. I just wanted to say I think what you're doing is brilliant." "Thanks, Janet, but I'm just protecting my property." "No, you're exposing the incompetence of our HOA board. Did you know they've been spending our dues on facility maintenance for buildings we can't legally access?" I hadn't known that, but it made sense. "Janet, have you talked to other neighbors about this?" "Oh yes, we're organizing. Carol Martinez has been running this HOA like her personal kingdom for too long." By Saturday morning, there was a petition circulating to remove Carol Martinez from the HOA board. By Saturday afternoon, there were enough signatures to call for an emergency board meeting. By Sunday, I had residents stopping by to thank me for finally standing up to the HOA. But Carol wasn't done fighting. Sunday night, I was woken up by the sound of a chainsaw. I looked out my window and saw 2 men in dark clothes cutting through my driveway chain. I grabbed my phone and called 911 while filming through the window. 911, what's your emergency? There are people on my property with a chainsaw, cutting through my security chain. Are you in immediate danger? I don't know. They're trespassing and destroying my property. The police arrived within 6 minutes. They caught the 2 men red-handed with a cut chain and a chainsaw. Both men were arrested for trespassing and destruction of property. But here's the interesting part. When the police searched them, they found a note with Carol Martinez's phone number and the instruction, "Cut chain, restore community access, call when finished." Carol had hired vandals to break into my property. Monday morning, Detective Sarah Chin called me. "Mr. Johnson, we've charged the 2 men with trespassing and vandalism. But we're also investigating who hired them. They had Carol Martinez's phone number. We saw that. We'd like to interview you about the ongoing dispute with the HOA." I met with Detective Chin that afternoon and told her the whole story. She was particularly interested in the HOA's attempts to claim ownership of my property. "Mr. Johnson, what you're describing could constitute fraud. If they're using fake legal documents or misrepresenting property ownership, that's a crime." "What happens next?" "We're going to interview Mrs. Martinez and examine all the documents the HOA has been using to justify their claims." 2 days later, Carol Martinez was arrested for fraud and conspiracy to commit vandalism. With Carol Martinez facing criminal charges, the remaining HOA board members went into panic mode. They called an emergency meeting and invited me to negotiate a resolution. The meeting was held at the community center, which was ironic since nobody could actually get there without crossing private property. The remaining board members, 3 middle-aged suburbanites who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, sat across from me at a folding table. "Mike," said board member Tom Wilson, "we want to resolve this situation amicably." "I'm listening." "We're prepared to acknowledge that your driveway is private property and withdraw all claims to community access." "That's a start. What else?" "We'll remove all HOA signage from your property and pay for any damages." "Tom, that's not enough. Your former board president tried to steal my land and then hired criminals to vandalize my property. I want more than an apology." The 3 board members looked at each other nervously. "What do you want?" asked board member Lisa Park. "First, I want a formal written apology from the HOA acknowledging that they attempted to illegally claim my property. Second, I want reimbursement for all my legal fees. Third, I want the HOA to properly secure legal access to community facilities so this never happens again." "That could cost tens of thousands of dollars," said Tom. "Then you should have thought of that before you tried to steal my driveway." They asked for time to consider my demands. While the HOA board was deliberating, Frank Peterson and I met for coffee again. "Mike, I've been thinking about our situation," Frank said. "These people have been using my land for 15 years without asking. Maybe it's time they paid for that privilege." "What do you mean?" "I mean they need access across my property to reach the main road. Maybe we should charge them for it." Frank had a point. The HOA had created this mess by trying to take what wasn't theirs. Now they had to pay to fix it. We developed a new proposal. Frank would grant a formal easement across his property in exchange for a one-time payment of $15,000 and annual easement fees of $2,000. I would restore access to my driveway for community emergencies only, in exchange for a one-time payment of $10,000 and a formal acknowledgement of my property rights. The HOA could pay our demands, or their residents could continue to park on the main road and walk to community facilities. The HOA board meeting the following week was standing room only. Residents packed the community center, those who could get there, to hear the board's decision. Tom Wilson stood up and addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached a settlement with Mr. Johnson and Mr. Peterson regarding the access issues." He outlined our terms. There was grumbling from some residents about the costs, but most people seemed relieved that the situation would be resolved. "The alternative," Tom continued, "is continued legal battles, potential lawsuits, and no access to community facilities. The board recommends accepting these terms." The vote was 127 in favor, 23 against. 2 weeks later, I had a check for $10,000 from the HOA and a signed agreement acknowledging my complete ownership of my driveway. Frank got his $15,000 plus a contract guaranteeing annual easement payments. More importantly, Carol Martinez was convicted of fraud and sentenced to community service and probation. She was also banned from serving on any HOA board in the county. 6 months later, life in the neighborhood had settled into a new normal. The HOA had elected a new board president who actually understood property law. They'd hired a proper management company to handle community affairs professionally. My driveway chain was gone, but I kept the no trespassing signs as a reminder. I also kept the security camera just in case. The best part? Property values in the neighborhood actually went up after the new HOA board took over. Turns out, having competent leadership and properly documented access rights makes a community more attractive to buyers. I still get thank you cards from neighbors who appreciated me standing up to the HOA's overreach. Some people think I went too far, but most understand that sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Frank Peterson and I became good friends through the whole ordeal. We still meet for coffee occasionally, and he always jokes that he should have charged the HOA for access years ago. "Mike," he told me recently, "you taught me that property rights aren't just words on paper. They're only as strong as your willingness to defend them." Looking back, I realized this whole situation could have been avoided if the HOA had simply approached me honestly from the beginning. If Carol Martinez had knocked on my door and said, "Mike, we'd like to discuss a formal easement agreement for community access," we could have worked something out. Instead, they chose to try to steal what they wanted, assuming I'd be too intimidated or too ignorant to fight back. They learned that assumption was wrong. The thing about bullies, whether they're playground bullies or HOA bullies, is that they usually back down when you stand up to them. But you have to be prepared to go all the way. I was lucky that I had the resources to fight back and the support of neighbors like Frank Peterson. Not everyone does. But the principle remains the same. Your property rights are only as strong as your willingness to defend them. And sometimes, the best defense is a good offense. The HOA tried to steal my driveway, so I legally cut off their entire neighborhood. In the end, I got paid for protecting my property, they learned to respect property law, and the community became a better place to live. Not bad for a guy who just wanted to park in his own driveway. The neighborhood is quiet now, the way suburban neighborhoods should be. My driveway is mine, Frank's getting his annual easement payments, and Carol Martinez learned that fraud has consequences. Sometimes justice takes time, but when it comes, it's worth the wait.